Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. As I mentioned at the end of the last lesson, we're nearly halfway through the course at the moment. We have reached the point where we have laid the strong foundation upon which we can build more complex knowledge sets. In my mind, I have been thinking of this next unit of 4 lessons as an introduction to some common problems that English language learners often encounter in their sentences. And once again, as I mentioned at the end of the last lesson, even many native speakers of English make the errors that we are about to address. So surely, do not feel bad if you find yourself running into these problems. The topic of today's lesson is run-on sentences. Many people have heard of run-on sentences, but I find that relatively few actually know what they are, how to identify them, and how to fix them. Understanding how to complete these various tasks will rely on knowledge that we have gained in several of our previous lessons. The relevant prior lessons are those about conjunctions, about dependent and independent clauses, and about compound and complex sentences. You may find it helpful to review these previous lessons before you embark on this next topic of run-on sentences. So what is a run-on sentence? Maybe you know that writing a run-on sentence is a way of committing an error in English language grammar. If you know this already, then you're off to a great start in your knowledge. But what else is there to know? Many people are tempted to say that a run-on sentence is a long sentence, maybe a too long sentence. In fact, not all long sentences are run-on sentences, and not all run-on sentences are long. I can write very long, non-run-on sentences, and I can also write relatively short run-on sentences. So the length of the sentence is not as important in deciding a sentence is a run-on. Identifying a run-on sentence as such has rather to do with the clause structure, the punctuation, and the use of conjunctions in a particular group of words. Let's look at a particular example of a run-on sentence in order to see how one works. Here, you will need to look at the words on the screen in order to appreciate the run-on sentence as such. Run-ons are much more easily identifiable in writing than they are in speech. Here's my example. David was extremely smart. He never answered any questions wrong in English class. This sentence actually seems pretty good, like it doesn't have any major problems. But there is an issue here. The sentence connects 2 independent clauses without proper punctuation or conjunctions. A comma is not a sufficient punctuation mark to join 2 independent clauses. You would need to replace the comma with a semicolon in order for the sentence to work properly. Alternatively, you could replace the comma with a period and then capitalize the first word at the beginning of the second clause. There are even more options that we will discuss in a little while. The sentence we're looking at here is a perfect example of a run-on sentence because it connects 2 independent clauses without proper connectors. And that's exactly what a run-on sentence does. It places more than one independent clause in a single sentence without proper punctuation, relevant conjunctions, or an appropriate combination of the 2. In fact, the example that we just looked at is a special kind of run-on sentence, one of the most common types that I've seen in my travels through the English-speaking world. This type of run-on sentence is called a comma splice because the comma in the sentence is used to splice or join 2 independent clauses. You need more than just a comma to join independent clauses. If you do decide to keep the comma, you will need to introduce a coordinating conjunction after the comma. For instance, you might correct the sentence by writing, David was extremely smart, and he never answered any questions wrong in English class. Some run-on sentences involve comma splices. Other run-on sentences are formed simply by smashing together 2 independent clauses without any punctuation at all. Consider this example of the type. The hockey player was accurate, she never missed the goal. In this example sentence, we find 2 discrete independent clauses connected with, well, nothing. No comma, no conjunction, no nothing. I've talked a lot in these lessons about the idea that there are many rules in English you are allowed to break. This, however, is not one way to break the rules. This is no way to connect clauses. We can do better, much better. So, how can you correct run-on sentences like this last one? There are several options. The first, most obvious way would be to punctuate the sentence with a period after the first independent clause, and then correct the capitalization of the second independent clause accordingly. That revised version would be, the hockey player was accurate, she never missed the goal. A second, closely related way to correct the run-on is to place a semicolon after the first independent clause, and then to make no further changes to the sentence. The simple introduction of the semicolon solves all of your problems. If you've been wondering about how to use semicolons, don't worry. We'll talk more about semicolons in a later lesson. Next up, we have the option of creating a compound sentence. You will recall from our earlier lessons that compound sentences are those that have 2 independent clauses connected by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. In this case, that would probably mean revising the sentence as follows. The hockey player was accurate, so she never missed the goal. Notice that, at least in American English, both the comma and the fanboys conjunction are necessary to create the compound sentence here. My friends across the pond in England might beg to differ on this last point, since they tend to use fanboys conjunctions without commas in such instances. But we'll stick with the American format for now, for the sake of consistency and maybe just to annoy my British friends a little. Finally, a last option for correcting the run-on involves creating a complex sentence. You'll once again recall from our earlier lessons that complex sentences are those that join two independent clauses using a subordinating conjunction, making one of the clauses into a dependent clause in the process. Depending on the sentence and the order of the clauses, a comma may or may not be necessary for this version of the correction. In our example sentence, I'm going to make the second clause subordinate or dependent using the subordinating conjunction since. The hockey player was accurate since she never missed the goal. As you can see, there are various methods for fixing run-on sentences, some simpler and others more complex. Which one you use depends likewise on a variety of factors: how you have structured the neighboring sentences, how much you want to clarify the relationship between clauses, how sophisticated you want to sound. I recommend trying your hand at all of these various methods in order to increase the range of your abilities in English. As I've already suggested, knowing how to deal with run-on sentences is an issue you will encounter primarily when you start writing in English. People speak in run-on sentences all the time, and without anyone knowing the difference. In other words, it's difficult to tell that a spoken sentence is a run-on sentence without seeing how the sentence unfolds in writing. Once you begin drafting important emails and memos in English, you'll need to know how to control the flow of your thoughts better. An important point to note in dealing with sentence structure in English is that complex, sophisticated ideas do not, I repeat, do not need to be communicated in complex, sophisticated sentences. An important skill in English language sentence construction is the ability to write clean, concise, even simple sentences. It does not, I repeat, does not make you sound or seem smart when you write in overly complex, convoluted sentences that run on too long. If you have not done so already, you need to learn how to break up your complex ideas into bite-sized pieces for your reader or audience to digest one at a time. You do not need to communicate every single aspect of your big idea in one sentence. There is no harm in waiting for the next sentence to express the next part of your big idea. If you learn how to break up your ideas and spread them across multiple sentences, you will quickly find that any problems with run-on sentences will themselves quickly disappear. Well, that's enough for today. Spread the word.